In the midst of difficult times, where pain and loss seem to dominate, Boaz's story emerges as a beacon of hope and redemption. In a setting of grief and despair, he stands up as a man of integrity, offering not only help but also a transformative future. Like many of us, Boaz faced difficult choices, but his faithfulness and kindness changed the course of the lives of everyone around him. If you've ever been lonely, in need, or feeling hopeless, Boaz's story is not just a reminder of the past, it's a promise of restoration and divine love that is within reach for all who choose to trust. Let's discover together how, even in the most challenging circumstances, God has a redemptive plan waiting for you. Before we begin, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Here, you will find inspiring stories that will touch your heart and help you understand more about God's plans for your life. If you are ready to dive into this journey, sign up now and come with us to discover together the wisdom that the Bible has to teach us. The story of Boaz takes place during the days of the Judges, a turbulent time in Israel's history. Without a king to lead them, each person did what they thought was right in their own eyes, which often led the people to turn away from God. This resulted in cycles of sin, oppression by enemy peoples, repentance, and deliverance through leaders known as judges. This time was marked by spiritual crises, internal conflicts, and external pressures. Turning away from God had direct consequences, such as famine and hardship in the Promised Land. It was in this context that Bethlehem, the house of bread, faced severe famine, causing families like Elimelech's to seek sustenance in foreign lands like Moab. Yet, even in the midst of chaos, God preserved faithful people like Boaz, a respected and upright man from Bethlehem. His story emerges as a beacon of hope, showing that even in difficult times, God was quietly working to fulfill his purposes and bring redemption to his people. Naomi returned to Bethlehem during the barley harvest after many years in Moab. She had left with her husband, Elimelech, and her 2 sons to escape the famine, but she returned a widow and heirless, accompanied only by her daughter-in-law Ruth. The tragedy had transformed her life. When they arrived in the city, Naomi's presence caused an uproar among the residents. Many barely recognized her and murmured, "Is it really Naomi?" Sadly, she replied, "Do not call me Naomi, pleasant, call me Mara, bitter, for the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Naomi felt the weight of her grief, but her return to Bethlehem marked the beginning of a new chapter. Ruth, at Naomi's side, brought a ray of hope. She had chosen to stay with her mother-in-law, even though she was a foreigner, declaring her loyalty to the God of Israel. Now, in a time of renewal, their arrival in Bethlehem was more than a homecoming, it was the beginning of something that would change their lives and, unexpectedly, the future of Israel. Arriving in Bethlehem, Ruth realized that she would have to take action to support herself and Naomi. With humility and determination, she said to her mother-in-law, "Let me go to the field and glean the grain after anyone who will let me." Naomi agreed, and Ruth set out. In those days, the poor and foreigners had the right to glean the remnants of the harvest, but the work was exhausting and dangerous, especially for a foreign woman. Still, Ruth rose to the challenge. She entered a field, worked hard, and stood out for her dedication. Unbeknownst to her, she was in the field of Boaz, a distant relative of Naomi. What seemed like a coincidence was actually part of God's plan. Ruth's courage to act paved the way for something extraordinary to happen, showing how steps of faith can change destinies. What do you think of Ruth's decision to take the initiative to care for herself and Naomi, even though she knew the difficulties and dangers? She not only demonstrated courage, but also confidence that God was in control of her journey. Leave a comment to tell us what this story taught you about acting with faith, even in the midst of challenges. I want to hear your opinion. As Ruth worked hard in the fields under the warm harvest sun, something unexpected happened. The routine of the field was interrupted by the arrival of Boaz. He was a respected man in Bethlehem, known for his wealth, wisdom, and upright character. His presence was commanding, and the mere sight of him approaching caused the workers to straighten their backs and stand up straight. Boaz was not just a landowner, he was a leader who cared for his workers. As soon as he arrived, he greeted the reapers with a blessing, "The Lord be with you." This greeting showed the kind of man he was, one who put God first. The reapers responded with respect and enthusiasm, "The Lord bless you." As Boaz watched the workers, he noticed a woman he did not recognize. There stood Ruth, her head bowed, diligently gleaning grain. He immediately asked the foreman, "Whose young woman is this?" The question was not asked out of mere curiosity but out of genuine concern. He wanted to know who this woman was who was working so hard among the others. The foreman replied, "This is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the fields of Moab. She asked permission to glean grain, and she has been working from early morning until now, almost without rest." This description impressed Boaz even more. He saw in Ruth someone who was not only a foreigner but also demonstrated a spirit of courage, humility, and determination. This first appearance of Boaz was not just a chance encounter. It marked the beginning of an interaction full of purpose and meaning. Boaz was not just a powerful man, he was someone with eyes to see the value in the efforts of a foreigner and a heart to act with kindness. Ruth, on the other hand, had no idea that her faithfulness and hard work had already caught the attention of the one who could completely change the course of her life. As Ruth worked hard in the fields under the warm harvest sun, something unexpected happened. The routine of the field was interrupted by the arrival of Boaz. He was a respected man in Bethlehem, known for his wealth, wisdom, and upright character. His presence was commanding, and the mere sight of him approaching caused the workers to straighten their backs and stand up straight. Boaz was not just a landowner, he was a leader who cared for his workers. As soon as he arrived, he greeted the reapers with a blessing, "The Lord be with you." This greeting showed the kind of man he was, one who put God first. The reapers responded with respect and enthusiasm, "The Lord bless you." As Boaz watched the workers, he noticed a woman he did not recognize. There stood Ruth, her head bowed, diligently gleaning grain. He immediately asked the foreman, "Whose young woman is this?" The question was not asked out of mere curiosity but out of genuine concern. He wanted to know who this woman was who was working so hard among the others. The foreman replied, "This is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the fields of Moab. She asked permission to glean grain, and she has been working from early morning until now, almost without rest." This description impressed Boaz even more. He saw in Ruth someone who was not only a foreigner but also demonstrated a spirit of courage, humility, and determination. This first appearance of Boaz was not just a chance encounter. It marked the beginning of an interaction full of purpose and meaning. Boaz was not just a powerful man, he was someone with eyes to see the value in the efforts of a foreigner and a heart to act with kindness. Ruth, on the other hand, had no idea that her faithfulness and hard work had already caught the attention of the one who could completely change the course of her life. Boaz, upon noticing Ruth's dedication, did not hesitate to praise her. He called her over and said sincerely, "I have heard of all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband. You have left your land and your family and come to a strange people." He was acknowledging Ruth's courage and faithfulness, who had made great sacrifices in following Naomi and embracing the God of Israel. Boaz continued, saying, "May the Lord repay your work, and may your reward be plentiful, for you have come to take refuge under the wings of the God of Israel." With these words, Boaz not only commended Ruth's efforts, but also acknowledged her faith and trust in God. Ruth, surprised by Boaz's kindness, fell down and asked, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz, touched by Ruth's humility, knew that her kindness came from a divine purpose, and the recognition of Ruth's faithfulness marked an important step in God's plan for her. If you're enjoying this story and are inspired by Ruth's faith and courage, don't forget to leave a like. This helps us continue to bring you content that touches your heart and shares powerful lessons from the Bible. So, take advantage and give us a like to support the channel. Boaz further demonstrated his generosity by inviting Ruth to lunch in the fields. "Come here, eat some of the bread and dip some in the vinegar," he said, offering her a meal. Ruth, surprised, had not expected such a welcoming gesture, especially since she was a foreigner working there. Boaz not only invited her to eat, but also had his servants prepare a generous portion of food, and she ate her fill. She ate until she was satisfied and had some left over. This gesture was a way of showing Ruth respect and dignity, something rare for someone in her position. At the end of the meal, Boaz asked his workers to drop more grain for Ruth to pick, ensuring that she would have enough to take home. This act was not just about feeding Ruth, but about treating her with care, respect, and consideration, something that she, as a widow and a foreigner, sorely needed. Boaz's meal was a clear sign of his kindness and how much he valued Ruth, not only as a worker, but as a person. After a while, Naomi began to notice that Boaz was being extraordinarily kind to Ruth. She noticed how considerate he was toward her and how he was making sure she had enough food, even dropping grain for her to pick. Naomi, with her keen eye and the wisdom she had gained over the years, recognized that there was something more going on here. It was at that moment that an idea dawned on her. She knew that Boaz was a respectable and God-fearing man, and she also knew that he was a close relative, someone who, according to Israelite law, had the right to help redeem Ruth's family if he so desired. The law of Levirate stated that when a man died without leaving children, a close relative was to marry the widow in order to preserve the deceased's name and inheritance. Naomi saw that this could be an opportunity to ensure that Ruth was cared for and that her lineage was restored. Wisely, Naomi called Ruth and said, "My daughter, it is time to find a place for you to rest, so that you may be well looked after." She knew Ruth was working hard in the fields, but she also knew she needed more than that. She needed security, a future, and the best way to secure that was through marriage. So, with a heart full of hope, Naomi gave Ruth guidance on what to do. Boaz is our relative, Naomi told Ruth. She explained how the tradition of Israel allowed Boaz to be the one to redeem Ruth's family if he chose. Naomi suggested that Ruth go to where Boaz was working at the end of the day after the harvest, and there she should humbly approach him and ask for his protection. It was a bold move, but it was the only chance to secure what Ruth and Naomi so desperately needed, a secure future and the restoration of the family line of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. Ruth, trusting her mother-in-law and the plan she suggested, accepted. Naomi knew that although it was a delicate and somewhat daring situation, if Boaz had his heart set on righteousness and God, he would make the right decision. This was the first time Naomi saw clearly the opportunity God was placing before them. Boaz's affection for Ruth and his generosity were not just coincidences, but signs that he was somehow being guided by something greater. Naomi, in her wisdom, recognized the right moment to act and, in doing so, offered Ruth the chance to change the course of her life, giving her new hope for the future. When Ruth approached Boaz at night, asking him to redeem her, he immediately acknowledged her request for marriage and protection. However, rather than acting rashly, Boaz demonstrated great honor and integrity. He responded respectfully, "The Lord bless you, my daughter," and stressed the importance of following the law. Boaz explained that there was a closer relative who had the right to redeem Naomi's family, but that if he did not wish to take on this responsibility, Boaz would do it. He wanted to ensure that the decision was fair and made according to tradition. Furthermore, Boaz took care to protect Ruth's reputation. He instructed her not to return to the fields that day, to avoid any gossip. As a sign of his respect, he also gave her a large portion of barley to take to her mother-in-law, Naomi. By acting in this way, Boaz showed that despite the difficult situation, he always prioritized honor, justice, and integrity, fulfilling his responsibility with wisdom and respect for Ruth and her family. Boaz, having ensured Ruth's safety and honored her offer of redemption, immediately headed to the city the next day, where a decisive moment awaited. He knew that the situation needed to be resolved fairly and transparently. The city of Bethlehem, like many ancient cities, was the place where business was done and important matters were settled, usually at the city gate, where the elders and leaders would gather to discuss legal matters. Boaz, with his dignity and integrity, made himself available to resolve this matter in the right way. He called the nearest relative, the man who had the legal right to redeem Naomi's family, to a meeting at the city gate. This man, who is not named in the story, was called by Boaz to discuss the situation of Ruth and her mother-in-law. "Come here, since the elders and leaders of the city are here with us, let us sit down and settle this matter," Boaz said to the relative, calling the meeting to order. With the elders present as witnesses, Boaz explained the situation clearly and fairly. He spoke about the inheritance of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband, and the need to redeem the land she had lost. Boaz made the proposal, "You have the right to redeem the land, but if you don't want to, I will do it." The closest relative initially seemed interested in redeeming the land. But when Boaz revealed that in buying the land he would also need to marry Ruth, Elimelech's widow, to ensure the continuity of the lineage, the man backed off. He knew that this would affect his own inheritance and the situation of his family, so he said, "I cannot redeem it, or I will ruin my inheritance." By this decision, he made it clear that he did not want to take on this responsibility. It was at this point that Boaz had the opportunity to take the lead. He declared before all present, "I will redeem it, for I have pledged myself to Ruth, the widow of Elimelech, and I will take care of everything according to the law of God." He accepted the responsibility to redeem the land, marry Ruth, and ensure that Elimelech's line would be preserved. The elders and all the leaders of the city who were present at the meeting blessed Boaz and recognized his decision as righteous. They said, "May the Lord make this woman like Rachel and Leah, the two women who built up the house of Israel." They also declared, "May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." They recognized Boaz as a worthy man and blessed his union with Ruth, wishing her success and that her line would prosper. At the end of the meeting, Boaz and the closest relative formalized the exchange of responsibilities, with the man leaving and Boaz making the commitment to redeem Naomi's family. The meeting at the city gate was more than just a legal formality. It was a pivotal moment that highlighted the character of Boaz, who acted with wisdom, respect, and integrity, fulfilling God's will to preserve the lineage of Elimelech and ensure a secure future for Ruth. This event marked the beginning of a new chapter for Ruth and Naomi, but it was also a testament to the justice and honor that prevailed in Bethlehem. In doing so, Boaz became the family's redeemer, and the fate of Ruth and Naomi was finally in good hands. After the meeting at the city gate, where Boaz made a commitment to redeem Naomi's family and marry Ruth, the wedding finally took place. Boaz and Ruth were excited, but also filled with gratitude, for they knew that they were fulfilling a greater plan of God for their lives. The wedding was a moment of great joy in Bethlehem. The entire city celebrated not only the union of Boaz and Ruth, but also the restoration of Naomi's family. It was a sign of hope, for their union symbolized God's faithfulness and provision, caring for those in need and restoring what had been lost. Soon after the wedding, God blessed Ruth with the conception of a son, Obed, who would be the grandfather of the future King David. The union of Boaz and Ruth, therefore, was not just an ordinary marriage, but had eternal implications, linking the lineage of David with that of Jesus Christ. Naomi, who had previously lost everything, now saw with joy the restoration of her family. She held Obed in her arms and experienced God's faithfulness. The marriage of Boaz and Ruth was not only a physical restoration, but a spiritual one, bringing blessings for generations to come. The story of Boaz and Ruth goes beyond their marriage. When they married, they began a lineage that God had already planned. Ruth gave birth to Obed, who was not only Boaz's heir but also the fulfillment of Naomi's prayers, who now had a grandson to restore her family. Obed grew up and had a son, Jesse, who would become the father of David, the great king of Israel. And it was from David that Jesus, the promised Messiah, would come. Thus, the marriage of Boaz and Ruth, though simple, became the foundation of a lineage that was crucial to the salvation of humanity. The faithfulness of Boaz and Ruth not only restored a family, but also paved the way for the coming of Christ. Their story shows us that acts of obedience and faith can have an eternal impact, fulfilling God's plans in ways we cannot even imagine. Now that you have heard the story of Boaz, I want to know, what impressed you most about the way he demonstrated integrity, generosity, and honor? How can this story inspire you in your life? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts. Let's talk about Boaz's legacy and what we can learn from him. And so, the story of Boaz teaches us that even when things seem difficult and hopeless, God is always working behind the scenes. Like Boaz, we can be instruments of change in the lives of others by offering love, help, and faithfulness. His attitude of kindness and his willingness to do the right thing, even when no one was looking, brought restoration not only to his family, but to an entire nation, and even to humanity. So, if you are going through difficult times, remember, like Boaz, you can be part of a story of redemption. God sees your faithfulness, your struggles, and He has a plan to restore your life in ways you never imagined. Don't give up, because, just like Boaz, God can transform your story into something great and full of purpose. If you were inspired by Boaz's story and want to continue following stories that transform and teach, subscribe to the channel now. Activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Here, you will find more powerful stories that show how God is always present, even in the most difficult situations. Let's learn more about the divine plan for our lives in each video. Don't forget to subscribe and be part of this journey.